To discuss how the doctrine of personal responsibility affects our views on the consequences of our actions, I'm going to speak about the insurance industry. In many situations, personal responsibility is fine, but much of the time the responsibility for something is shared. Sometimes it's shared by a huge number of people, and sometimes no one is responsible. To illustrate my ideas, I'll give you 3 examples: a standard slip and fall lawsuit, junk food obesity, and a sports injury. In the first case, someone is coming to your house in the middle of winter. There is ice on your steps, they slip and hurt their back. They sue you, saying that you should have had the ice cleared. Usually you do clear your ice, but that day you hadn't got to it yet. Who's responsible? On the one hand, you are. Your ice wasn't cleared. On the other hand, shouldn't the other guy have been more careful? So in that case, the responsibility is shared by at least 2 people. Moving on to the example of the fast food obesity epidemic, we can blame the people who are getting fat by saying that they should know better, and we can blame the advertisers and the restaurants and the schools for not teaching proper nutrition and the government who allow the food to be sold, and the friends and family who enable the self-destructive behaviors, but the list can go on forever. In this case, the responsibility would seem to fall on nearly everyone's shoulders. The third case is a sporting accident. You break your finger playing volleyball. You were doing everything right, but when you went to volley, your finger caught the ball a little bit wrong, or the ball spun a little different, and bam! No one's really to blame. Everyone was following the rules, you had warmed up before starting the game, you're a skilled player, and there wasn't any protective equipment that you could have been wearing. I'm going to cut right to the point and say that the insurance industry should be nationalized and its structure drastically changed. For this to work, we also need to eliminate civil lawsuits. In the slip and fall case, you can be sued if the accident is seen as your fault. Even if you win the case, there's your legal costs to consider. If it's determined to be a nuisance suit, then you might get your money back, but there's still the hassle and the stress and the guilt you've been made to feel. Why does blame need to be assigned in this situation at all? It's not as though the police felt there was a case for willful negligence. If you never cleared your steps or you intentionally made it slippery, then you should be fined or thrown in jail. But in this case, no one can say you were really evil or wrong. And the other guy wasn't trying to slip either. The problem is that he's been hurt and he wants compensation. But compensation for what? Lost time at work, medical costs, pain and suffering. Our society doesn't benefit if the man who injured his back loses time at work and is less wealthy as a result. Neither do we benefit if he is ill for a prolonged period. The other thing to keep in mind is that our society doesn't benefit if the guy with the icy steps has to pay a large settlement. Sure, we don't have to pay for the injured guy's health costs, but we have one more citizen, the guy who forgot to salt his steps, who's that much closer to poverty and who has that much less wealth to reinvest in the economy or to spend on his kids' education. What we as a society need to do is divorce the idea of blame from responsibility. Even if the slip and fall was your fault, isn't it all of society's responsibility to see that everyone is taken care of? Isn't that what the social safety net is all about? Making sure that no one gets left behind? Because it turns out that everyone is further ahead when each of us are further ahead. The guy with the hurt back should have his healthcare costs covered by the government. Here in Canada, his healthcare is covered. The system works. It's just drastically underfunded and misdirected. What about his lost work? If he can't work because of his health, he should get full government benefits for temporary disability, and the disability benefits should match his normal pay plus 15% to cover the higher medical costs. If he worked at a job that can't support him on this amount, then a base minimum should be determined. Regarding his pain and suffering, speaking as someone who has gone through a painful and serious medical ailment, I can tell you that there is no way to put a dollar amount on that. If someone had offered me money for what had happened, I might have taken it. But I only would have been seeking compensations as a way of punishing those I felt to be at fault, and it's the criminal system's job to punish wrongdoers. I admit that they aren't very good at it right now, especially when it comes to what I call epidemiological harms, like the obesity example. The insurance industry is supposed to take care of us if something goes wrong. If our house burns down, they buy us a new one. If we get sick or need medical care, they pay for it. The way the industry works is that everyone pays in and only a few claims are paid out. The money that's left over is profit and goes to the shareholders of the insurance company. There's a structural problem here, and it's easy to spot. Corporations have the single-minded goal of making money, and so it's in the insurance industry's interest to take in more money than they pay out. To achieve this, they try to restrict claims and increase fees. The government tries to regulate the industry to see that the claims are fairly paid out, but for every new regulation there are a team of lawyers trying to figure out how to get around it. This system can lead to nothing but an ever-escalating regulation arms war. The reason your premiums go up after a claim isn't because you are a greater risk. It's a way of discouraging you from making a claim. Imagine how it would be if rather than giving all this money for peace of mind to the insurance industry, we gave it to the government and it was their responsibility to pay out claims. First, the government would be flush for cash to spend on the social safety net. Second, they don't have to worry about turning a profit, so fees could go down. And third, as I explained in episode 1, the government's only goal is to improve our lives. If your house were to burn down, then the fire inspectors would come in and check for arson. The insurance assessors, who had worked for the insurance companies and now are employed by the government, come in and assess the value of your assets with the goal of fairness rather than corporate profit. The government then buys or builds you another house of the same value in the same area and cuts you a check to replace your lost items. If they find arson, then that's a criminal matter and you are punished, but your family still gets a new house. It's not to our society's advantage for your family to be punished for your misdeeds, as happens now with insurance claims. This would have a couple of direct advantages over the current system. Arson would drop off because if rather than a check you got a comparable property, what would be the point? And if you get a new house immediately, there isn't that terrible transition time when you're waiting for the claim to be investigated because your family is going to get the house regardless. If they haul you away for arson a few weeks later, it makes no difference. But what I've described doesn't solve all the problems. One of the problems with the insurance industry is that it makes certain businesses nearly impossible to run at a profit. From my personal experience, I'll talk about an indoor rock climbing gym. The insurance costs for all adventure sports are incredibly high because while the claims are few and far between, the injuries and resultant payoffs are severe. This restricts the industry in a massive way. Many gyms, if there were a successful claim, wouldn't be able to afford the increased premiums and would have to fold. If this is the case, why are they paying insurance in the first place? We shouldn't be paying insurance at all. We should be paying higher taxes with the knowledge that, no matter what happens to us or our property, the government will take care of us. The best argument against this is that by making the user pay, it ensures that they are careful and conscientious. People talk about activist judges. First of all, I don't believe that such a thing exists. The perception that judges are making law is created by the unresponsive legislative branches of government dragging their feet. Epidemiological harm is something that I'm going to speak about in another episode, but for now, let me say that the criminal code needs to be amended to address the issues of large-scale harm done to citizens by corporations. Obesity is a good example of how government is dragging its feet. You shouldn't be able to sell food that has nearly no nutritional value, or a coffee that has 100% of the recommended daily caloric intake for an adult. The government needs to regulate food and all industries to ensure that harm isn't being done to the user. But some foods are only healthy in moderation. What about them? For one thing, we need better nutritional and health information in schools and in the media at large. I've spoken about the advertising industry, and the changes I've suggested would help people make better choices. Where the criminal code needs to step up is by making it illegal to create a product that is harmful in great quantities and addictive, to the extent that to satiate your desire would do you great harm. You can probably tell that I'm not just talking about the food industry now, I'm also talking about tobacco and to a lesser extent alcohol. We shouldn't have to sue tobacco companies. They should be charged with a crime because what they've done, knowing what they knew, is criminal. The same should be applied to all industries. Some of the food executives and scientists who work for them should be investigated and face trial. In case of an accident, the rock climbing gym's practices should be examined, and if there's willful negligence, then that's a criminal matter. But if the industry guidelines need to be raised to avoid future accidents, that should be the government's responsibility. The final example I gave was the volleyball injury. There's no crime here. The person with the broken finger should have the medical bills paid for. In the unlikely case that they happen to be a concert pianist or have some other job which requires great dexterity, then they should be compensated for the lost income until they can go back to work or can be retrained in the case of permanent injury. We have a responsibility to the permanently disabled in our society to see them live as active and as vital lives as possible, and this doesn't mean benefits that leave them just this side of the poverty line. From a practical point of view, this might actually end up decreasing what we pay to aid the disabled, because with proper support, financial and otherwise, they have a better chance of entering or re-entering the workforce. We can also learn something from the European model of partial disability, where a disabled person can work at half or quarter time, but receive their full wage with the government making up the difference. The disabled have greater burdens. Whether the disability is their fault or no, we have a responsibility to lighten their load. What I have in mind is that in the case of the slip and fall, the obesity epidemic, and the sports accident, the same model should be applied. Was there criminal intent or criminal negligence? If yes, the guilty should be punished. And second, who was harmed? Whoever they are should be taken care of for as long as necessary. And third, what can we do to avoid this in future? As long as it's within reason, whatever it is, do it. Don't shoot me down, make suggestions. My name is Colin Jones and I want things to get better.